I wanted to make a video today about um really my symptoms of my schizoaffective bipolar type and also when I first noticed or even like symptoms that I had before I even noticed that I could have potentially had this condition, and then before being diagnosed and then after being diagnosed. Um so of course typical symptoms, because it's bipolar and not the depressive type. I have symptoms of, mania, like manic episodes, as well as hypomanic episodes, but mostly hypomanic, and then sometimes there's the classic manic episodes. Um, I have really low lows, really high highs sometimes. Um, and then anything in between, like hypomania, mania. Um, I have delusions, psychosis, that breaking with reality portion of things. So my psychosis symptoms can be anything from feeling things on my body to, um, you know, hearing things to uh, just seeing things, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about my personal symptoms, and how it is for me in particular, because everybody is different. So not everyone is going to have the same experiences that I have. Um, but I think it's reassuring and kind of nice to just be able to, uh, I guess, see that someone else is going through something that is a little like could be scary even at times, and that most people don't really experience. Um, so I mean, outside of the psychosis, the delusions, thinking that I can tell the future, or thinking that people are talking about me when they're not, thinking someone is out to get me, like attack me, um, you know, thinking things that are not really based on reality, but I convince myself somehow that I can do these things, um or that those things are real, when they're not really real. Um, they're not really based on people. My delusions tend to be based on myself. Like, the biggest ones are really thinking that I can tell the future. And it's really hard to break out of that when I'm um really stressed out, or when I sort of like, if a big event happens. I'll talk about it a little bit later. One instance that happened that, honestly, thinking back on it right now is like, oh God. Um, but yeah, then of course, like I said, the mood symptoms. I think there's tons and tons of videos about what bipolar is on YouTube, and you might not need me to really explain that. But I'll explain a little bit. So the manic episodes for me are probably my most creative and my most just productive times that I ever have. Um, because I'm not depressed, but also because in those moments, I think that I'm just capable of doing these really, really big projects, and that I can just accomplish a lot of things. And I'm not saying I don't, but it's really hard to keep up a project when the mania dies down. And then I think, oh gosh, what did I do? I just started a whole business, or I just, I mean, it's happened, trust me. Just tried to start a whole business, um, or I started this really big project, and now I can't finish it. Um, yeah, it's really hard to sort of manage that. And I've been working a lot with my therapist to try, and when I feel sort of like this impulsivity trying to start, um, to really think back and not act on it, uh, to really just sit. down with it and really think really, really hard and maybe ask like my fiance or a family member if my family isn't all of that supportive about mental health issues, but when it comes to ideas, at least they can sit down and listen to an idea and say, it's a little grand, don't you think? Or they might be like, yeah, that's a really good idea. Why don't you go ahead and do it? My fiance is really the one who I sort of relate, not relate, but like rely on when it comes to my impulsivity and whether I'm acting on something that I really shouldn't be acting on right now. Um, I mean, I try not to put too much on him, but you know, uh, you can only my support system is only so big, right? So, yeah. But anyway, the let's talk about the psychosis and the delusions. So, with I'll start on the let's start on the delusions first. So, delusions for me, like I said, it could be thinking that I could tell the future, which happens a lot when I'm really, really stressed. And um, stress seems to aggravate a lot of my symptoms, especially the hallucinations and the delusions. So when I'm like very stressed out, to the edge of, constant panic attacks and things like that, I tend to start thinking that I can like think of the future or think that something is bad is going to happen if someone doesn't listen to me. So for example, I remember uh a couple times like my fiance would be on a gig. He's an audio engineer, so he'd be on a gig and I'm like, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't do that." And he's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Something bad is going to happen. I just know it. It's going to happen." And he's like, I really think that I should be going to do this and it's a really good networking opportunity, for example. And so he goes and nothing happens. And it's just like, oh, well, I thought it was going to happen, right? But of course, if something had happened, then it would have reinforced my uh, delusion. So it's really important to understand that when something does happen, it's not because I could tell the future, it's because it just happened. There's a lot of different things that can happen when you go out into the world, even when you're not out in the world, when you're in your own home. So I think it's important to just remember that not everything is something that you can that you can tell. You're not a fortune teller. It's just it happened. Um, and it's probably not going to happen exactly as you think. And when you say something really vague like, "Oh, something bad is going to happen." Well, what is that bad thing? Because it could be anything. And you didn't tell the future, you just said something bad is going to happen, but you didn't say specifically what. So I think for me, it's very important to sort of just remind myself that when something does happen, it's not because I told the future, it's because there was the possibility of something bad happening. Um, but also trying to ground myself and remember that I'm human and not some type of special being who has these magical powers. Um, I remember I'll tell you a little story about a big delusion of mine for a while. It lasted probably 4 days, I think. Um, and so an earthquake had just happened. It was we don't I'm in New Jersey. We don't experience earthquakes like that. So when it does happen, it freaks me out. Um, this is my second earthquake ever. So I the earthquake happened and I was like, oh, this is really weird. I don't know what's happening. Is a truck passing by? It wasn't a truck. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And then it was like, oh, it's an earthquake. And after the earthquake, I guess I got so stressed out and sensitive, and I started having these visions of or what I call visions of a big war and uh, a missile being sent out to this place that the war was happening in. And I was like, "Oh, what is that? Like that's really scary." And it just stuck with me. And I kept getting every single couple of like hours, I kept getting these visions. And every time I closed my eyes, I would get this vision of this war and of this missile just going off. And every single time I would get more information and more details of this image, right? Um, and eventually I was like, okay, this is really weird. And then I started noticing the colors on the missile, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a United States missile. And then I was like, let me see. And then I went off the deep end and started looking up like different kinds of missiles that are from the US. And I narrowed it down to this one specific missile. And I was like, oh my God, it's a nuclear missile and they're going to nuke somebody. And I was like, come, like, just imagine this is happening in the middle of a whole delusional attack, right? And I'm here sitting here like very scared. And it didn't help that my family is very, let's call it, conspiracy theorists. And they also believe that people have, powers and gifts, right? So they think that my psychosis and delusions are a gift and that I can actually tell the future or that I can actually see things that aren't really there because they're trying to communicate with me and tell me something. And so that doesn't help because in the middle of this delusion, I was talking to my family about it and they're all like, oh my God, I can see that's really happening. And did you know that I heard this and I heard that? And it just fueled everything. So something that should have lasted one day was fueled and lasted about 4 to 5 days. Um, when I did break away from the delusion, and I mean, I talked to my fiance about it, and I felt like he was like, "Hey, I think you're just being sensitive. There's this whole war happening already. If you guys don't know, I'm not gonna say it here, but look at the news. It's still happening. Um, so you're just being sensitive, and I think that, uh, it's really important that you take some time back and really try to relax. I think you're seeing news about this war. And I said, no, I'm not seeing any news. Um, I haven't seen any news. I um, have sort of just stopped letting that come into any of my feeds on social media and stuff like that because it's too much. So this is something completely different and it's doesn't have anything to do with that. And I sort of kept fighting him and he was just trying to be really nice about it at the time. But I think he also wasn't understanding that it was a delusional episode that I was having. And so I don't think he really understood how to approach it, other than just trying to calm me down and sort of ground me a little bit, which is really important. You have to be grounded by something or somebody, whether it's yourself or a loved one, or you change temperatures or do whatever you've learned to cope with these delusions, right? Um, and it was just a really interesting time for me, because I was really sensitive that entire time and I just kept being fed and fed and fed. Like the delusion was just growing because my family kept feeding into it. And I really want to caution people about that because your family, yes, they are supposed to be there for you, but when they have these thoughts and these ideas that aren't really based on reality, that they're based on conspiracy or they're based on, um, things like magic or things like uh gifts, like, oh, you have a gift that was given to you by God, or some special being, or you're special and you can see things and hear things that we can't, and you can help, let's say, the dead, or you can help spirits pass on and things like that. It doesn't help people who have delusions, and it doesn't help people who have psychosis. It's very important that we create a safe space for us, people who have schizoaffective or even schizophrenia, or even bipolar people, because when you're bipolar and you're manic, you can have symptoms of psychosis. So, it's very important that we create a safe space where when we are having some of these episodes, we can go to these people and say, hey, is this real or am I just crazy? But even those safe, like, even those people like can become part of your delusion. And like, for example, you might think that they're in with a conspiracy or something. So I think when that happens, it's important that you find a group of people who can help you and really understand that if someone calls 911 on you, or they say they just want to help you, don't feel some type of way when you come to, when the delusions stop, because they really just want to help you. And sometimes the delusions don't stop and you do need professional intervention. Um, really talk to your therapist, to your psychiatrist, to your psychologist. Hey, I this is a delusion that I'm having, or hey, I really think that XYZ is out to get me, or I think that my family is part of a cult and I need help getting out. Or, tell them what you're thinking. Tell the professional what you're thinking, and they will know how to help you. Hopefully, hopefully it's not someone who is incompetent, because there's been a lot of professionals I've encountered that are incompetent and don't really help. So, yes, that's another important thing. Finding doctors and a team of professionals who can help you when you're having any type of delusional, you know, or psychotic break. It's important to work with them and to be honest and to tell them what's happening, and to really feel like, if you feel that you can't tell them that your family's in a cult, or that you're you think that the US is going to nuke somebody, then they're not the right team member for you. So if you can't tell them what you're thinking, they're not the right member for you. You need to find somebody else.